This week, we flipped the script. In the leadership and communications section, CISO and crisis. Will SEC Cybersecurity Regulations make a difference? NIST Drafts Major update to its widely used cybersecurity framework, and more. In our second segment, we air 2 pre-recorded interviews from Black Hat 2023. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
According to the 2022 Data Breach Investigations Report, the human remains the #1 driver of breaches today, demonstrating that cybersecurity is no longer just a technical challenge, but a human one as well. But how do you manage the human risks of cybersecurity? It starts with measurement. Only by effectively quantifying human risk can organizations engage employees with relevant activities to truly change human behavior. That's human risk management. Map key human behaviors to the business risks that matter most to your organization for free by visiting securityweekly.com/living security. If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing, which is a dynamic, nonlinear, and unconventional approach to computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today by visiting securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 316, recorded August 14th, 2023. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. Joining remotely are my co-hosts for today. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. Hey, Jason.
What's going on, Matt? I'm excited. Preseason football is in full effect. NFL season is soon to come. Loving it.
Yeah, so I only watched a little bit, right, as I was telling you before the show, but I saw the binary defense logo on the Cleveland Browns Stadium. And I was like, oh, that is so cool.
How cool is that? How cool is that? Nah, it's good. I mean, we're testing out our rookies and seeing what that roster is going to look like for the year, so we can have at it when the season rolls.
Absolutely. Also joining us this week, welcome back, Mr. Ben Carr.
Hey, Matt. Good to be back with you and Jason after a week out last week doing some family stuff in Florida. It was hot there and come back and it's hotter here. So, yeah, it's just par for the course, I guess. Texas summers. Welcome to Texas, Matt.
Oh, yeah. Well, we were in Ohio for this weekend and it was 80, 85. So I got a little relief for a few days.
Oh, nice.
Then it was nice. But then we got some big rain. I'm like, can you send that down to Texas? Like, we need it down here, buddy. Whew.
Yeah, we could use some water for sure.
Yeah. Security Weekly listeners, now is your chance to join the InfoSec community as they come together at InfoSec World 2023, September 23rd to the 28th at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort in Lake Buena Vista, Florida. Hear keynotes from Scott Shapiro, founding director at Yale Cybersecurity Labs, and Rachel Wilson, managing director and head of cybersecurity at Morgan Stanley. As a Security Weekly community member, you're able to receive 20% off your InfoSec World 2023 tickets using code ISW23-SecWeek20. Register today by visiting securityweekly.com/InfoSec World 2023. Well, with the interviews, the pre-records after this, we're going to go right into articles. And this first article I pulled was CISO in Crisis. There's been some interesting articles since the SEC regulation announcement a couple weeks ago. I pulled in another one here in a second. But this one was a little interesting because, you think about the role of the CISO, and we've had a lot of conversations on here about some of the challenges, struggles, et cetera. This guideline comes out, but we still see a crisis with the CISO? I think we do, right? Right, guys?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, from my perspective, I don't think that
so.
stops the pressures, right? The pressures don't stop. We have regulatory and compliance changes that are constant moving target. With all the new innovations like artificial intelligence, quantum down the pipe, the threat landscape is constantly moving, and now you have board of directors and executives speaking cyber all the time. Not to mention all the other aspects, vendor risk, the expectations of what the CISO brings to the table. They call that out here. Many times it's the pressure of being a scapegoat if something does go down. So it hasn't stopped the pressures, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting read, and it was an interesting take that they had on it. There were some interesting quotes, right? Who's the most visible target? The CISO. The CISO sucks it up. The CISO takes the shaft. I mean, it's it's pointed, but it's accurate. Like this is right. What we see is it's this while a chief, right, among the other groups of chiefs within the company is also kind of take the brunt of everybody else's concern. And that's contributing to, I guess, the turnover, the frustration and the stress. Is it's not treated with balance, even though it is, as we've talked about many times, typically one of, if not the highest risk in a company. So yeah, I would say CISOs are definitely in crisis. And while I think many were pinning their hopes on the SEC regulations, I don't know that that's a fix. It's going to be hard ahead of us still.
Yeah, that's what leads into the second article, right? Because the fix could be the SEC regulations. So the second article, will the SEC security regulations, really make a difference? And it's funny, you read the first opening kind of paragraphs and it says, but will this change anything? Short answer, no. The longer answer, maybe.
Maybe, right. But at the end of the day, it's what you do with it, right? It's whether or not your organization wants to embrace it and make the necessary change and go down that journey of managing the risk as a true strategic business risk, right? I mean, if a lot of this burnout from the CISO side of the aisle is, at the end of the day, the lack of the support and mutual accountability across the organization. When CFOs or CEOs or boards of directors don't want to invest, they don't want to support security, they don't want to put the funding there, they don't want to give you the resources you need to make a difference, and then at the end of the day can point a finger at you and blame you for anything that may have happened in the organization. And we're starting to see criminal liability being thrown around here. Of course it's going to create that burnout. So it's what you do with it. If an organization wants to improve and actually embrace it, I think they can be successful. If they ignore it and continue on with allowing the CISO to just be that figurehead with no level of influence, I think at the end of the day, it'll fail.
Yeah, it seems like, if we're going to give, CISOs the responsibility and potentially hold them to legal action and, ask for increased transparency, then I think as an industry, we actually need real transparency in a way for CISOs to have that valve to be able to call fouls when they see them, and not come under action or, if they're actually calling out real issues in the organization, right? I mean, I think we've moved away from the, everything's a problem, the sky is falling. That's not where we are anymore. I don't know many enterprise CISOs who are acting in that capacity. So if you're acting in the right framework, in the right mindset, then I think, not having a valve to actually call a problem when you see one and not be concerned about loss of a job or impact down the line, that's not helpful for anyone. And so I need that manifest guidance and actually provide that valve.
Yeah, I was looking through the practical advice from this article, and there was a couple interesting ones. One, all this stuff we should already be doing, but the guidance based on what came out of the regulation changes from the SEC. So the first one, embrace proactivity. Well, the only way to embrace proactivity is to have a risk-based approach. Like, you can't be proactive if you don't understand how security risks align to business risk and you're measuring risk, right? So we go back to risk management. In the next article, we're going to talk about enterprise risk management in a second, because it was so important in this discussion that I wanted to pull in an article about, well, what does enterprise risk management mean? Because you can't be proactive if you're not measuring risk. Can you, Jason?
No, not at all. Like we talk about all the time, we need to be actively managing risk or we'll end up reporting to someone. But at the end of it, I look at this article and that list of items that that they're suggesting, not as CISO suggestions. I think these are things that the entire executive team needs to be able to wrap their hands around and really be responsible for. This isn't just for the CISO. This is for the entire executive team. And to be honest with you, the board as well. Think about it. Engage the board as part of it. Well, the board needs to be engaged back, right? You're talking about having a compliance team, but what do you do with it, right? Are you sharing that with the executive team to make good decisions? Consider cyber insurance. You need your executive team being part of that, so that way you can make sure you're protecting yourself from the overall risk. Your CFO should be involved. Your CISO should be involved. Your legal team should be involved. Manage your vendors. The CISO can't manage all the vendors on their own, right? It takes a team to do that. It takes your executive team to have that management.
Yeah, it's an interesting call, Jason. I actually think it is something that really the executive should sit down and figure out, like, what is our approach to cyber and how are we going to treat this, and what's the tone from the top, not being just the CEO, but all the executives. Like, how do we get everybody on board with the same mission? And if you have the same mission, I think you can execute. But if you don't have the same mission, then you're always, there's infighting. So I think that's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, the CISO cannot accomplish all of these things by themselves. So there has to be skin in the game with the entirety of the executive team around all of these pieces of advice.
Yeah, and I think the wiggle room for the executive team is determine materiality. So this gives them an opportunity to decide what's material and what's not material, which is a little squishy, which we got to be careful with. And then obviously the disclosures you're going to have based on that materiality, right? That's like the squishy wiggle room for the executive team, because there weren't more kind of hardline or prescriptive requirements. So this is kind of the out clause, because I don't know if it was this article or another article, they were talking about, Walmart's disclosure statements currently that they do today, and how would those change under this regulation? Yeah. I don't know that they're going to change that much.
Right.
Well, and that's going to be the challenge, right, for the CISO and the rest of the staff and the rest of the executive staffs to figure out what is material. And if there's a conflict, wow, that can be that's where the meat of the problem is going to be, right? Is the challenge if the CISO thinks it's material and somebody else is trying to say it's not, then you're a little bit stressed with figuring out, is there a future that come of this if it not being material?
Yeah, I think this is where, we talk a lot about building relationships across the entirety of the executive team and the organization. This is where the CISO has the opportunity to soften the earth and have conversations ahead of time and start prepping other executives to be able to understand, where risk is and the materiality of the risk, and start building that consensus and that tribe walking in the door when decisions are being made. The decision shouldn't be being made for the first time in that executive team meeting. You should be softening the earth well ahead of time, so that way you have your stakeholders on board with you.
Absolutely.
Well, it goes back to like tabletops, right, Jason? I mean, you got to practice this stuff. You got to have those discussions and say, okay, here's the scenario. Is this material? Okay, let's tweak the scenario. Is it material now? Like what changes it, and where do we feel that material comes in? Not necessarily so you can figure out in the tabletop, but so people can take that away and be like, man, how do I think about this, right? And if you're engaging with those conversations, you're having those practice sessions, I think when that muscle memory is going to be built where it's not as, people aren't making the calls that they wouldn't make if they had that prior training and education and information.
100%.
So Jason, this next article is for you because you said it takes an entire team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this article really talks about who participates in enterprise risk management and what's their role. And it starts at the top with the board of directors. But the list of I don't think people understand like how important the overall risk management and all the participants of a risk management process need to be.
Matt, at the end of the day, it would have been an easier article if they listed who shouldn't be involved, because it's everybody needs to be involved. I mean, if you look at it, it goes all the way from the board all the way down to department managers and then staff as that overarching, involvement. It's everyone. Everyone needs to be involved in risk management. It's the analogy. Folks know I was in the Marine Corps, and one of the first things you get trained on in the Marine Corps is every Marine is a rifleman. It doesn't matter what your job is. It doesn't matter your MOS or what school you're going to or what you're going to be doing on the norm. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that you're a warrior and that you can go out there and do the core functions of the Marine Corps, which is defend this country, right? So every Marine is a rifleman. Well, guess what? Every employee is a cyber warrior. Every employee is a risk manager, because I want interns identifying risk. I want entry-level folks identifying risk and raising their hands. It's everyone. It's the only way to be able to combat this.
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about CISOs trying to have a seat at the table, and it is interesting how many people actually have some peripheral part of the conversation about risk. But when you're looking at, I counted these numbers on there's 14, and I mean, most companies I look at, you see the C-level staff at kind of an 8 to 10 number, and when we wonder why, the CISO doesn't have a seat at the table, and it's difficult to have those conversations and figure out, where they fit in the structure. 14 is a big number, right? And I'm sure other people would put other people in this list that report into the CEO. So I mean, when you think about structure and you think about who's having those conversations, Jason, you mentioned earlier, you've got to build those relationships. You've got to have part of that conversation that exists outside of the boardroom and outside of the C-level staff meetings.
Yeah, and Ben, I mean, as well as I do, at the enterprise level, the CEO is trying to minimize direct reports, right? In some instances, 100%. You see CEO, then chief operations officer, and chief revenue officer, and then the entirety of the organization goes down from there.
Yeah,
in many instances, you see maybe a handful of direct reports. Everybody else is going to be one more tier down, right? So at the end of it, you have all of these filters going upstream. That's the challenge.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, how much is getting filtered out at each level as it rolls up versus having a more flat structure or more visibility into some of the risk across those different roles? So yeah, it's an interesting challenge, to say the least. NIST is they're drafting a new update of the cybersecurity framework. Now, there's a couple really interesting pieces in this. When it was first announced, I remember I was at RSA where I was on the Archer team when this was first kind of brought out into the market, and it hasn't really been touched, like 10 years, something like that. So you've got the first draft that comes out. A couple major changes in the draft. Number one, they don't talk just about critical infrastructure anymore. Originally, cybersecurity framework was about protecting critical infrastructure. They removed the critical infrastructure to be more open to all industries, which I think is something we needed way, way long ago, but glad they finally did it.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, all industries were using it as a base framework anyway, right? I mean, that's right. I've seen the CSF as a starting point for so many organizations, so many verticals to get their toe in the water and actually start making some progress. So I'm glad they're adapting it to be a little bit more agnostic to your vertical. It's great.
Well, look, at the end of the day, like if you think about, okay, you're in critical infrastructure, you've got vendors that are critical to your operation, right? And so that supply chain means everybody's critical infrastructure in a way. I mean, it's naive to think that there aren't interdependencies there that can impact really important parts of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Agreed. But it was some people took it as it's only for critical infrastructure. I think it was being used more widely. It's opened up more widely. The second major change I pulled out of this article was the new domain of governance. Now think about that for a second. We're talking about SEC requirements and compliance and all this other stuff. So they've added this governance domain or governed domain to the original identified, protect, detect, recover, respond. I haven't dug into the details yet. I'm curious how they interrelate those pieces to the rest of the structure, but I'll dig into that after this. Now that I've seen that it's been released for comment.
Yeah, and I mean, in many instances, security leaders and organizations were leveraging that governed portion outside of the framework, but obviously influencing the framework. But to see it embedded in is going to be interesting. I can't wait to see how the final comes out. And just so everyone's aware, I mean, they're accepting public comment until I think November, right? So we still have the opportunity to influence any addition, changes, adds, modifications that we'd like to see. So if folks are out there, go look at the draft, and they're accepting public comment.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Next article, redefining leadership. Obviously, we talk a lot about leadership on this one. This is a Forbes article, and as I see good Forbes articles get pulled across, I kind of grab them and pull them in. And this one talks about kind of the evolution of leadership in org structures, right? Because I think there is no right structure anymore. There's so many variations, organization to organization, industry by industry. And what this article tries to do is be like, look, organization structures can vary, but these are the things you need to focus on, right? Focus on emotional intelligence and communication. Like, those were the two big takeaways for me out of this article.
100%, and it supports the fact that an org chart doesn't necessarily define leadership, right? So it's not about the org chart. It's about being a leader within your organization and making that impact. And the two core pieces are emotional intelligence and the way you're able to communicate, right? Communicate with your stakeholders, communicate with your audience. And we talk about a lot, emotional intelligence is a skill that allows you to be able to communicate the right way to the right person at the right time in the right format. Because you're being empathetic to their feelings, the way they work, the way they communicate. I hearken it back again to that servant leadership style where you're thinking about others, right? You're thinking about how you can help others be better.
Absolutely. Ben, any comments on that one? Did we lose Ben?
No, I just think you got to figure out what the organizational structure looks like and what the I don't know what the emotional intelligence of the org is, right, and how it best fits into your approach to leadership style. And this stuff it's a pendulum, right? It swings back of and what the right approach is, and you're approaching it not just on, hey, this is my title and I can get this done because of a title. That just never works. I think it's I align with where Jason was on this.
Yeah, and it ties back a little bit into the enterprise risk management conversation we had, right? When you listed out like 14 roles, like how do these roles get aligned to the CEO? They don't all have direct reports, but how can you leverage, communication skills and understanding kind of your role in the organization, how to communicate to different levels to create more of a enterprise risk management environment? Like, you can almost associate these two articles in some respects, say it doesn't have to be a hard structure, but somebody's got to do these roles, and there has to be communication in discussions across these roles to get to the overall outcome. And I think this article kind of highlights like there is no right structure.
No, 100%. And again, leveraging that emotional intelligence and the ability to communicate effectively, you can design your communication in a fashion that you can articulate a risk in one way to the CEO and then kind of change your communication style a little bit if there's a different personality, or, if you're communicating to the CFO. It's okay to adjust the communication based on who you're communicating to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the CISO's biggest capital is influence, right? If you can get influence with people and build consensus, you're going to go much further.
That's right.
That ties into this last article a little bit, because I love the way he framed some of this out in this last article, which is, creating a roadmap for your dream cybersecurity job. Okay. And I don't know, it's down towards the end, Jason, but he talks about technical skills, leadership skills, and business skills. And he
Yep.
says, if you want to be a CISO at a Fortune 500 company, the role should focus on leadership skills, which is why we spend a lot of time talking about leadership.
Yep.
A CTO at a cybersecurity company would require a focus on technical skills. Now, this is where we've had some struggle with the CISO role in the past being a technical role versus a leadership role, but I love how he framed this out. And then, obviously, the CEO at a of a cybersecurity company needs to focus on the business skills, right?
Mhm.
And so I've gone through this transition myself over the years. I started very technical with a very technical set of skills. I learned leadership skills. Then I took those into the business skill side. So I've hit all these buckets. The question then that you have to answer yourself is, where do you lack certain skills based on what role you want to go to? And then how do you map out which direction you go next?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true. I mean, your career path is very similar to mine. Started off uber technical, right? And then worked my way up through leadership and really studied leadership and how to be a good leader within the organization. And then from there, started sharpening my business acumen, really learning the language of the business, learning the language that helps support your company and your business and really bring it to that next level of growth and expansion. At this point, I think for folks at our level in our career, there's so many different. I have we've talked about it before. This personal board of directors that I learn from all the time, folks that I trust who are more experienced than me, who've been there, done that in business, and I try to tap as much into them as I possibly can to learn more, get guidance on direction, get guidance on next steps, career pathing, and then just being part of different different networking groups. CO, Chief Operating Officer forums and groups, and cybersecurity leadership groups, and really just getting exposed at this level. I really think it's a scenario where, as you're mapping out the future of your career, just leverage the resources around you that you can find. Don't be afraid to reach out to people to mentor you and help guide you, no matter what phase of your career you're in.
Yeah, I think, as you're starting out in your journey and mapping out your career, be an observer, right? Find the things that work. Look for the people who you want to mirror and imitate because you see that their style is working for them and it's getting them for their business. And then look for those people as mentors and establish those mentorship relationships where, I think those things will carry you very far in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody summarized it really interesting a week or two ago, was saying, when I look at your background, you're either a product-focused business leader or you're a business-focused product leader. I thought that was a really interesting way to summarize it. I'm like, yeah. That's kind of right.
Yep.
Yeah. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Stay tuned. We're going to take a quick break and then air 2 pre-recorded interviews for Black Hat.